The Showbud Still, to my left here, is the one that Pete used on the Bob Dylan albums that he played on here in Nashville. This is the still that from probably the most famous still part that Pete played on was the Lay Lady Lay riff that he did on the Bob Dylan session. On top of the Showbud amplifier sits a talk box. If Pete was not the inventor, he was certainly an innovator on the talk box. And this is one of the talk boxes that he took to England and was using on the session, at least was he was showing George Harrison what it sounded like and what it was. And I had a very young 19-year-old Peter Frampton hear this and go, "What is that?" And Pete gave him one of his talk boxes. And Pete said, and I gave him one of my top boxes and he got rich off of it. And it certainly did become his trademark. And led to Frampton Comes Alive album, which is still, to this day, the largest selling live album of all time. This still is a still that Pete named Old Goalie. It was used on George Jones, Tammy Wynette, Charlie Rich, Kenny Rogers, Lucille, just so many hit records. It's really, again, it's hard to even try to imagine how many great records it still was used on. The picture behind me is a picture of Pete on the top left, George Harrison seated next to him. Next to him would be Ringo Starr, Billy Preston, and in the bottom is a very young Peter Frampton. And that was the All Things Must Pass album that George Harrison asked Pete to play on. That came as a result of George hearing Pete playing on the Bob Dylan sessions and the fact that Charlie Daniels had Pete's phone number and was able to pass that along to George Harrison when he brought up Pete's name. The album pictured below the still is called Bukus of Blues. That was the album that Ringo recorded here in Nashville. Being a country music fan, Pete said when Ringo picked him up in his big Rolls Royce or Mercedes or whatever it was, big car, he said the back seat was full of 8-track country tapes, and that Ringo would ask him all these questions about whatever happened to the musician that played on so-and-so's record and so-and-so's record, and Pete was like, I don't know, you know, and Pete said that Ringo and the Beatles knew more about the Nashville players than he did. This is also the album that was recorded completely here in Nashville with Nashville musicians, photography and everything. And when it came out on Apple, it said recorded in England. There may have been some passport issues, work permit issues, something like that. Or it may have been that they just didn't want to say they recorded in Nashville. They didn't want the people to, just like they do today, to assume that Nashville is strictly country. Although Ringo came here to cut a country album, I think that the main reason was that they may not have had a work visa. The guitar next to the still is a harp tone guitar. A harp tone guitar manufacturer knew that Pete was playing with George Harrison and would be going to England to record, and asked if he would mind taking some of their guitars to see if he could get the Beatles or a Beatle or someone to endorse the harp tone guitar. And indeed, George Harrison loved the 12-string harp tone, and when you view Concert for Bangladesh, when George Harrison does My Sweet Lord, the 12-string guitar he picks up and plays is the one that he recorded the song with, and it is the 12-string harp tone that Pete brought over and gave to George. Next to the harp tone is a pair of original sticks that Ringo used here in Nashville. Although he didn't play on the album, he didn't play drums on his album, he did play drums on some jams and late night recordings that they did here in Nashville after the session. But DJ Fontana from Elvis Presley and Buddy Harman, studio drummer, were the drummers on the Ringo Starr Bukus of Blue album. The striped polka dotted shirt is the one that Ringo is wearing in the picture in the studio where he's singing with Pete Drake, the producer, to his right. Pete said that he just happened to mention to Ringo that he liked the shirt, and Ringo took it off and gave it to him. So Pete and Rose kept it all the time. Directly behind me is a leather case that Pete used to carry around on his sessions, that he would carry maybe some extra strings or whatever. He may have his top box put in there. But he also had the 12-string tunings, the tunings that he would use. Like for instance, it starts off with a G being 11, was how he would keep up with what gauge strings that he would use. There's also a 12-string dobro, electric dobro. I've had a number of people come in, players, who said they've never seen a guitar like that before. Neither have I, but it was one that Pete did use on All Things Must Pass album, on a song that Bob Dylan wrote called If Not For You, that George covered on his album.